tuning in to Now That's Debatable. We have Wes back on, one of our favorite guests. Facade may or may not be joining us. I'm not sure he got some other things going on, but we're going to rehash this conversation about morality somewhat. I guess so. I got some questions about some of your objections to my moral systems. But for one second, let me make sure it's actually streaming. Oh, okay, I just
I
found
think
it.
it
All
is.
right.
Yeah.
So, um, where I want to start. I guess where I really want to start. So, did you ever get a chance to re-listen to the episode that we did when you got to like grill me on my moral system?
I wish I had the time.
Okay, yeah,
Unfortunately, I did not. So I
I
think
feel you.
some of it
Yeah, it's like a two
may,
hour long conversation. All good.
yeah.
So I think so. I think one of the when I was listening to your objections, I
Hmm.
think there's a one of the issues is that my system has no alts,
Hmm.
and then you think that it should have alts, but also since it's secular, it can't have alts. Am I describing that right?
You're describing my critique.
No, yeah, your critique of my system.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think
Okay.
it does not have alts, and
Mm-hmm.
but because of the nature of the framework, it can't.
Okay. So now, why do you think a moral system should have alts?
Because of the function of morality. I would say, first off, there may be others. I don't want to just narrow it down, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, first impression when you think about morality, it has to do with, among other things, human actions, right?
Okay.
So there's a sense in which, we're both parents, so we're
Mm-hmm.
training up our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, do this, don't do that, right?
Yeah.
That's just a basic system of morality. So there is, I think, at root a necessity for prescriptions for things that you either should do or restrictions, things that you should not do.
So right. So now I'm not opposed to alts. So my
Okay.
question not isn't why shouldn't we have alts. My question is why should a moral system have alts? Because I do have alts. I believe you can have alts. But my
Yeah.
question specifically is why should that be part of a moral system?
I don't think it should be part of a moral system. I think it's intrinsic to any sort of moral system, because, as I said, morality has to do with behavior. So we live
Mm-hmm.
that out. How we behave is going to indicate, it, if nothing else, what I should or should not do by how I behave. Right? Our
Mm-hmm.
beliefs are going to drive our behavior. So my beliefs about morality will influence how I behave in society.
Okay. So now
Is
I
that fair to
don't.
say?
It's fair to say, and I'll tell you why I disagree. Because
Okay.
for one, I don't think a good moral system will have odds. It's not a good moral system isn't going to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. A
Hmm.
good moral system will tell you what is and isn't moral, and that's it.
Okay, but that's a question of moral ontology. Can
Mm-hmm.
we agree on that? Like
Yes.
what actually is? Would it not necessarily flow with moral truth comes moral duty?
No.
No. Okay.
And that is the big hang up because
Okay. So
I think
where's the disconnect for you? Why
I
is there not a necessary connection between those two?
because I think you believe you solved the is ought problem, and yeah.
I'm not talking about mine. I'm talking about in
Mm-hmm.
your view. Why is it that the moral duty is disconnected from the moral truth?
Because of the is ought problem. Like there is a
Okay,
structure the way logic work that if
sure.
you have in Aristotelian logic, like propositional logic, you have
Hmm.
premise conclusion. If your
Okay,
premises are all ises, your conclusion cannot contain an ought. If it's an ought, it's a non sequitur. It just falls apart.
okay. I think I can agree with that in a sense. When you talk about the is alt problem, I think the way that it's typically used is in instances where the is not morally relevant, or doesn't have a moral component to it. So let's just say, so to get an ought from an it, like the law of gravity,
Mm-hmm.
it's real, it's part of reality, none of us would dispute it, it's an objective fact. You can deny it and jump off the roof of your house if you want to, but you're going to have to go to the hospital afterwards, or at least walk on crutches for a bit. um, Whether or not you should or should not jump off the roof is disconnected from that, because the law of gravity is not intrinsically moral. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
So,
whether you jump off the roof is going to be contingent on your values and also like on the
right.
context. Like if you value your life, you may or may not jump off the roof. Like I can give you a scenario where jumping off the roof would be the rational thing to do if you value your life. You know,
Oh,
buildings on
sure.
fire,
If there's,
you
yeah,
nowhere
yeah.
else to go. Right, right. And so like, but that assumes that you value your life. You valuing your life is an axiological question that has nothing to do with morality.
Mm, okay. I'll follow you.
Okay. Well, that is why I separate them,
Okay.
because in any other system, you run head first into this problem. Matter of fact, like I even during our discussion on libertarianism, right?
Uh-huh.
So like you had started off with I had this talked about property, right? And that's why I started off the discussions discussing property
Yep.
and how people should respect each other's property. And you asked a very good question, and you're like, why?
Hmm.
And I said I wanted to jump past that because if we handle that, we're not going to get anywhere. Because that question that question is asking how do you get from how do you get is from property is mine to you ought to respect it. It is a non sequitur.
I,
That is why I
okay.
avoided it. That's why I
Okay.
avoided it. And then I even said, hey, we could just put it on God just so we can move forward. Otherwise, the conversation wouldn't have gone anywhere, right?
That's fair. So if I understand the way you're building this out, for me to respond to that with the connection is thou shalt not steal, you see that as my solving of the is alt dilemma,
Yeah.
the isness
What
of valuing property rights with the alt of nobody else should take it from you,
right?
basically.
Even like with your overall Christian system of
Hmm.
morality, like because like, you think God solves it,
I
right?
I hesitate to say that God solves it, because I don't really see it as an issue. It's not an issue in a Christian or biblical framework in the same way that it is with atheistic frameworks. So I guess in some sense, recognizing that God is and has given us these moral prescriptions does alleviate that, but I don't see it as a problem that it solves so much as a hurdle that we never run into because it's not real.
So, it's this has nothing to do with atheism or theism. This is about logic. Like
Well, sure,
there's a
but to just
mhm.
to put a pause on that, starting with a theistic or an atheistic framework will have downstream impacts. And so what I'm saying is a, not any theistic framework, but a specifically biblical Christian framework downstream, we don't have an is alt problem. So it's not a problem that's solved a a priori, right? So whereas in an atheistic framework, I think you do run into that problem, which is why so many philosophers have written about it and talked about it ad nauseum. So
So,
I think from that perspective, it is important to the discussion because of the necessary outwork, or at least the practical outworkings
I can
in those two
demonstrate that you
systems.
have this problem. Like it,
Okay.
if your system doesn't have this problem, then it's not logical. This is
Okay.
the way that it departs from logic itself. And okay, let's say for okay something that we agree that is wrong, like murder, it's
Hmm.
wrong, right? Okay, so I think it's wrong because it violates well-being. You think it's wrong because what it
It's an assault
It
on
violates
the
God's
image of
nature.
God.
Okay. All right. So let's say that's a is that this is that's a is. Murder
Hmm.
violates the image of God.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, how do you get from that is to I ought not to murder?
How do I get there?
Yeah, logically. Okay. Could you make a valid syllogism that starts with murder violates the image of God to I shouldn't murder?
Oh, that's. I mean, never really thought about it in syllogistic terms, um, but I, I think this is probably another fundamental difference of the moral framework.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that the quote unquote command, right? The sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not murder," um, is not something that has to be revealed to us. It's something that we know instinctively, right? So in that sense, it doesn't really fall in the category of uh, an analytic or
I'm not
synthetic
asking if
question.
you. I'm not asking
Oh, I
whether
know,
you know. I'm
right?
just asking. Can you make a valid syllogism? Because like
Yeah,
in any
I'm working
any
on it. I'm
sort of
talking until I
statement.
have something to say.
Okay.
But okay, so you start with the moral fact: God created man
Yeah, I'm
in
just gonna
His
give you the
image,
is. Yeah,
right?
any is.
And
I'll just grant. I'll say
okay,
Jesus rose from the dead. I'll grant whatever is,
right, and
unless I hear a value. Then I'm going to object.
yeah. So as creations of God, we ought to behave in the way that He's made us. Um, any issues
So
with that?
is that your premise?
I I don't really
Be-
know. I'm thinking out
Okay,
loud. Like I
yeah.
say, I'm just
I
doing this on the fly.
okay.
Uh,
All right.
but
So,
so you have God as a reality,
mhm.
man made in His image.
Man is made in
Um,
His image.
the revelation that we should not murder,
That,
whether you
there's the
want to take.
problem. You said the should.
Well,
Okay.
no, I'm saying that's. But okay, where's the problem there?
Okay. So that
Within the Christian framework, where's the issue?
well within logic that should that's an ought.
No, no,
So
no. The
if
Okay, all right. Let's back up for a second.
mm-hmm,
Whether or not you agree with the ought, from a Christian perspective, the fact that our Creator has said X
mm-hmm.
is is an is,
Yes, sir.
right?
He said that.
Okay,
He said you should not murder. I'll grant it.
okay. That's what I'm saying. So that statement
Mm-hmm.
is an is.
That's it is.
Okay, and from that, from those three premises, we are created by God. We are created in the image of God. We are created
Is.
for the purposes of God, communicated through the is.
Is.
Therefore,
Mm-hmm.
we ought to
Non
behave.
sequitur.
Why is it a non sequitur?
His we so his purpose that that's an
Hmm.
is. That doesn't mean that I ought to obey his purpose or that I
Sure,
ought
sure
to care
does.
about his purpose.
Sure does.
It doesn't. No, that
As
doesn't follow.
for you being made in the image of God,
Mm-hmm.
for by your Creator, in the image of your Creator, for the purposes of your Creator,
Because it
to act
is
in a way that is contrary to that is something you ought not to do.
non sequitur.
You say it's a non sequitur, but
It is.
I think rather than being a non sequitur, it's a conclusion that disagrees with your framework rather than a conclusion that doesn't fit in that structure.
It's a conclusion that
And
violates logic. Where did the ought come from? So you understand? So a conclusion cannot contain information that isn't in the premises. So in your conclusion, I ought to be able to look in any of your premises
you
and
what you ought to be?
huh,
Is that something you should be able to do?
if we're following logic, yes,
Okay.
yeah, okay. So I if you're for it to be valid, I should be
Hmm.
able to look at your conclusion and look at each premise and tell where this comes from. If you throw it in there, then it came out. It'd be like saying, "Oh, like all men have a father. I'm a man, therefore my father's Elvis." Right now, it'd be like,
That's
"Hey, where did Elvis come from?" Right? Because I just introduced it in there. Right?
hmm
So, like, what you could conclude is that I'm a man. I have a father.
But that third premise contains the fact that God has presented this ought to us, right? So it's not coming out of the blue. It's built into the structure
So
of the syllogism, if you will. So it's not a non sequitur in that regard. It's something you disagree with,
so no so
sure,
no. Remember, I was only going to grant you ises, because
right?
if you're
And
gonna
you
say
granted that as an is
right,
that God said, "Thou shalt not
well,
murder."
God said that you ought to do it. That doesn't mean that I ought to do it. Just like I can create a syllogism that says, facade says that you ought to do something, therefore you ought to do it. That doesn't follow. Just because somebody said a thing doesn't mean that somebody ought to do anything else. That ought is going to be the problem.
Okay, well, it's not just anybody saying it, right? It's not just me saying it. It's your creator who has authority over you.
It doesn't
In
alter
the same
logic.
in the same way, right? Or not in the same way, in a similar way, you tell your kid playing out in the yard, "Hey, don't go out in the street." Right? And somebody friend from the neighborhood is out in the yard playing and say, "Hey, come over here." "No, I can't go out in the street." Well, why not? For your child to say because dad said not to is not a non sequitur. It's not disconnected from the argument. It's built in because you necessarily have authority over your child and are able to give
There,
binding moral oughts.
no, there's an implicit premise in there,
Okay. What's the implicit premise?
it's about valuing your life. But if you don't,
No. It has nothing to do with valuing
oh,
my life.
or valuing something, valuing your daughter, valuing authority, or something in there.
But that's not a
But
hidden premise. That's in the I guess would
I
be
said it's
premise
hidden
two.
because you didn't explicitly say that.
Well, it's contained in premise two, being made in
Hmm.
the image of God. That's what that command is rooted in part.
Hmm.
Is the fact that man is in the image of God. There's a value to man that's not extended to any other part of creation.
Okay, but just because you value something, it does not
It's
follow that.
it's not a me valuing thing.
It just because God values something, it doesn't follow that anyone else ought to be
I,
compelled. Because
let's say
where is that ought
that
coming from?
isn't an inconsistency in Christian morality. That is an inconsistency between Christian morality and you. I hear it a lot.
Does
Just because God
Christianity
says it,
follow
just because
logic?
the Bob. Does Christianity follow logic? Sure.
No, it wouldn't. Not according to you. Not from what I'm hearing.
No, but I mean, you haven't pointed out anything that's a non sequitur about it because
I pointed out ought is not in any of the premises.
right, it's in the third premise. You shall not murder.
No. The premise is God said you shall not murder,
Right.
not you shall not murder. Okay, so there's no
Right.
ought.
But
God said
there's
that.
the revelation of that
Right.
you should not, I should not.
No,
That's what's
the revelation is God said you should not murder.
Mhm.
Okay, there's the is. God said you should not murder.
Okay. Add another
It
premise.
doesn't follow
You
that
are included in the you.
right. It doesn't follow
All
that.
humanity is included in the you.
This is what you could say.
Okay.
If I value God's opinion, then I ought to do that.
No. Because the moral imperative in that instance is true or false regardless of your agreement to it. But because you will be held to that standard, like it or not. That is
That and it doesn't matter. I may not care about being held to the standard.
okay, and
That
that's fine.
again,
But
that
once
gives me no
again,
ought.
that doesn't change the flow of the argument.
You can say,
that
God,
shows a
if I
disconnect
don't,
between you and Christianity, which we knew from the beginning. That's not adding any new information.
no, it's a disconnect from logic because it doesn't. You could say if you do this, God will send you to hell. It wouldn't follow that you shouldn't do it. If you care about not going,
we're not
to hell,
talking about consequentialism, right? We're not talking about whether or not you get sent to hell. We're talking about the nature of humanity has been revealed such that there's a prohibition against anybody, any one of us, shedding innocent blood. Right?
So
you shall not murder is you agreed, at least in principle, that was a statement, that was an imperative that was given.
I'm not saying it's an imperative. I'm saying I'm granting you the
what else
is.
would you call the statement "you shall not murder"?
So if you say it's an imperative, then you're
I'm
saying
just asking
that
what you would call it. what would you call the statement, "You shall not murder"?
Okay, that would be an imperative. But that is
Okay,
not the premise I agreed to.
right. But you
God
agree to the premise of
said you
God.
shall.
So
It
God
is it
gave
is
a moral imperative. You that's
the
accepted
the
as the freaking.
imperative. You're throwing the ought into your premise,
Um,
and
w-
that's fine. You can do that, but you're not solving the is ought problem.
Again, the is all problem is not a problem for Christianity to solve. Never has
Okay,
been.
okay, well, so if you don't have to solve the is ought problem, then I don't either, and I can just say you shouldn't do it because it violates well being. There's your ought.
Well, the difference is you don't have any binding authority on me. And this I do remember this from our previous conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I made the statement to some form or fashion that your moral judgments only make sense in the confines of your own mind, because you don't have the framework to have a moral authority over anybody. The
This
difference
is
is
this
God
is another point
does.
that I wanted to go. So now,
Okay.
okay, you said no. You said so like in order to make a true statement, you need authority.
No, I'm not saying to make a truth statement you need authority. To make a moral imperative, in order for you to tell me I shouldn't do something, in order for me to tell you you should or should not do something, there needs to be some level of authority there.
Okay, so now remember, my system does not do that,
Right, because you
and
don't have
so
any oughts and it can't.
and you don't have any oughts either. You just say
I don't have
somehow
any oughts that you recognize. That's the
I
distinction.
pointed out the oughts because your arguments are non sequiturs.
It's
And
not a non
I
sequitur.
could just do I can just do the same thing. Like you could say
Okay.
that there's a God who has the authority, and I could say, oh, I have the authority. Like I could just mirror your argument, but it doesn't change. It
It
doesn't
doesn't work
change the
for
structure.
you, but because God is not a man. Right? So you
The,
equating yourself with God for the purposes of an argument is a category error. Now that is a logical fallacy, and that would be you committing it. And I know you wouldn't do that because you value logic much more than that.
so
Unfortunately,
that's not a category error, and that's another thing that
yeah,
I want to get on. I don't think you know what a category error is. Because
okay.
you had said that few days ago. We were talking online,
Oh
but
yeah,
okay, now
that was on the Facebook
yeah.
Facebook comments.
So no, okay, you said now when I say something, if I say a act is immoral,
Hmm.
all right, I'm only stating a fact based on my analytic proposition.
Okay.
Now you're saying I need authority to say that.
Well, let's be more specific.
Hmm.
What's your analytic moral statement?
So all right, so so my analytic proposition is that morality is that which contributes. A moral act is an act that contributes to well-being.
Okay.
Well-being. Uh,
Yeah, we've talked about that before. There's like
mm-hmm.
6 or 7 components to it.
Yeah, we can
I,
break it down. Well-being is just the totality of your experience, and
okay.
you can broke it down to health, wealth, happiness, security, freedom. There might be another one, and I said all the things that I can think of falls into those categories. I'll be fine with adding others, but any other thing that I think of seems to be able to fall into one of those categories.
Okay.
All right. So now, all right.
So I'm tracking with you.
Mm-hmm. Now, somebody um slams you in the head with an axe that clearly violates your health. I say that act is immoral.
Hmm.
You're saying I can't say that because I don't have authority.
No, I'm not, because that is a moral observation, right? In the same way that you can look outside and say the sky is blue, right?
So
Not that the sky
I'm
should be blue.
declaring it. I'm saying, hey,
Yeah,
that act.
you're making a moral observation. That act is immoral, right? To use your terms, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you were to turn to somebody and say you should not hit that person with an axe because hitting somebody in the head with an axe is immoral, those are distinct statements.
Yeah,
The
you can't do
latter
that.
is the moral observation.
Neither one of us can do that. That is my. I agree with you. If I was to turn to someone and say, "Hey, you ought not to do that," because it violates because it's immoral. Yes, nobody can do that. Does not follow.
Okay. Well, in your framework, then nobody can make any moral imperatives on anybody else,
So when you
and
say
so we're all just
imperative,
autonomous individuals with no moral binding responsibility on anybody else.
that's the case. For the first, whether there's a God or not, we all seem to be moral, autonomous individuals. Like people go out and do
Why?
bad. They go out and do bad things all the time. God never, he never stops in any of it.
Where do you get this
So,
idea bad from?
so something that you and I would both agree that is bad. For instance, like murder. Even
Yeah,
you don't have to
but
agree on it.
on your view,
So you said like on my system, people
mhm,
are just morally autonomous.
mhm,
They are on yours as well.
nope.
Okay, where does God stop people from doing bad things?
It's not that God stops people from
Then
doing
they're
things.
autonomous, aren't they?
That's not what autonomy means.
If they're they can
Autonomy
act on
literally
their own.
means a law unto yourself, right? Self law, like automobile, self
Hmm.
drive, right? Autonomos, right? Self law. You are a law unto yourself.
Okay, well,
Christianity,
if
I
that
mean, at its core, is not autonomous
okay, well,
because the
that's not how people usually use like autonomous. Like if I were to create an autonomous robot, we're not saying oh the robot is a law unto himself. No, it means like it can make like some basic decisions without me interacting with
it
it.
doesn't make
That's
I mean, it operates on its own. Sure, that's one instance, but we're not talking about a commonly used
hmm.
situation with robots. We're talking about moral philosophy, and autonomy has a defined is a
So
defined
you said
term.
a law. So in my system, you're not a law unto yourself. Just like if I was to whack you in the head with an axe, I don't get to decide that it was healthy for you. That's just not
Well,
how it works. Reality dictates morality by the way that I defined it.
right, but
I'm gonna say not morality. I'm saying reality.
sure,
Reality dictates that.
yeah, but I mean, reality is accept, but there are no moral uh, prescriptions or restrictions in your. You can say something is immoral, but that judgment, as I've said before, only
Mm-hmm.
makes sense in your own mind, right? And I'll give
But
you credit.
it doesn't make sense
It's a
in my own
fine
mind.
framework.
But you understand the system. How does it doesn't just make sense in my mind if you understand it? Like you
Because
can
we're made
look
in
at
the
it.
image of God and we both reason accordingly.
Okay, but you said
That's
it
part of
only makes
common
sense in my
grace.
mind. You can't evaluate an act and determine whether or not it was healthy for
No,
an individual.
but if your ontology is true about humanity, right? There's no reason to expect your moral system makes sense in anybody else's mind. If for no
There,
other reason, we're explaining the same moral judgment in completely different terms.
so there's plenty of people that understand my moral system. Like the
Okay,
people in the comments, like Phantom, he disagrees, right? He
you mean it?
disagrees with me. He understands the system. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing here hard to understand. It's like it
Okay.
it a so how are you saying that it only makes sense in my mind if you and several other people understand it?
Well, I'm saying it's a framework that is not necessarily binding on anybody else.
So
That's what I mean when I say that, because you can have this framework, this moral framework,
mhm.
and you can operate on it, and you'll get by pretty well.
Question now. Here a question. Do you think do you think that a moral ontological system, do you think criticizing it for not being binding makes a lot of sense?
I think so because of what I said it from the
But
outset.
no, but it's just descriptive. Why would it need to be binding?
Right.
It's
Well,
like
again,
criticizing a phone because you can't drive it to work.
we've got two completely different worldviews happening here. In your worldview, as you've clearly stated,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not pushing back on it, but there are no moral oughts, right?
Didn't
My
say that.
framework.
So no. So my moral system does not have oughts. I have oughts
I
based
just
on
said that.
my values.
Okay, but I mean, like there, you have individual moral oughts, but your
Yes.
system has no moral oughts because
Yes.
of the is ought issues.
Because it's ontological, right?
Right,
So it makes no sense to say that that's not binding. Like it's like
right.
it's like you
So
are criticizing a descriptive system for not being prescriptive. Well, of
I'm
course it's not. That's not what it is.
okay. Well, I think it at least raises the question. I won't say it begs the question, but it raises the question of how do you know?
It's analytic. Like it's based on the definition. It's like if I say
Well,
a foot is equal to 12 inches. Well, how do I know a foot is 12 inches? Because that's how I define the foot.
well, I would
That's an
push back
analytic.
that I would push back that your uh, statement is analytic because it depends on what you mean by well-being. And I say that because we have two different views of well-being. And I know that's something that we kind of talked about before. And you said, taking the immaterial spiritual aspects out of it, or
No, I would include
include.
that
No,
if
that's
if
what I meant.
yes,
Include them, and it's just fine. But I would say when different people hear the term well-being, it doesn't elicit that checklist that you rattle off.
it
So,
falls
at
into
least in
that.
my understanding of synthetic, it depends on what you mean by well-being,
It falls
right?
into that. It
So,
falls in
okay,
like
let me
let's say
just
like
push that back a bit and
right,
say,
if
how do
you
you draw the connection between well-being and those six things? Like, how do you know?
so well-being is a description of your experience. When I say experience, like the experience that you have, like your thoughts, your being,
Hmm.
and I could break down your experience in those prongs, and there's things that I can do to affect you, and the way they affect you, it will be broken down into those prongs. It's going to affect either your health, and or your wealth, and or your happiness, and or
Hmm.
your security, and or your freedom.
So the way you
Or
explain it is not consistent with the analytic view or the analytic proposition. It's more synthetic precisely because you're talking about things after the fact.
no,
It's not something that you're coming into it with. So I mean, it's
so
circular reasoning basically.
it's not
You're,
circular. Okay, uh, if I say that a triangle is a shape with three sides, and a
hmm
shape with three sides is a triangle, is that circular reasoning?
no, I mean that
That's what
is,
I'm doing.
and but the problem is when you have the term well-being in there, that term well-being doesn't necessarily mean what you say it means.
No, no,
That
okay.
that's what I mean. So it's not
Words,
necessarily
word,
tautological.
words do not have intrinsic meaning. Okay, so what I say,
Okay.
okay, I say when I say the word morality, what I mean by that word
Hmm.
is an act that contributes to well-being. And when I say well-being, they you can break this down into these six prongs. And I
Hmm.
can I can break it down even further. We could talk about what health is. We could talk about what wealth is,
Hmm.
right? And all of those things, right? So these are just definitions. There's no circle.
Hmm.
All I'm doing is defining a term.
Okay.
So there's nothing synthetic. You don't even need anything to exist. There, people don't have to exist. You can still
Okay.
have the analytic proposition.
It's a meaningless statement then if
It
nothing
wouldn't be
exists.
meaningless, right? Just like I could say, I said if I said,
Whose
uh,
health are we talking about? Whose wealth are we talking about? Whose happiness are we talking
it
about?
doesn't have to
If
be a
there's
who,
nobody.
but just like I can give you an analytic proposition of a leprechaun, which is just the definition of what a leprechaun is, and you would get an image in your mind despite it not existing. So what I'm saying, analytic propositions are not contingent upon the existence of anything. There's
Okay.
just defining a term. That's all it is.
Okay. And my request for a connection between your definition of well-being and your use of it in connection to morality is just baked into the cake. It's something that you build a wall around and say there's no need to have the discussion about it.
No, I didn't. Well,
We're done.
no, I'm definitely down to have the discussion. Like we're doing it right
But I mean,
now.
so
So
where does that come from? Um, because the way you described it
hmm
is at least my understanding of synthetic because it has to do with experience and consistency with the world, which is a posteriori rather
hmm.
than a
So
priori.
so
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 it's muddying the waters between analytic and
so
synthetic
a
the way you
synthetic
explain it.
a analytic proposition
Hmm.
is a description of a term, right? A synthetic
But
proposition,
it's not merely a description. It's got a built-in definition.
Yeah, a definition is a description, right?
Okay.
When you
Okay.
define a word, you're describing, right? So you are defining a term, describing a term. A synthetic proposition is describing reality. So
Hmm.
like I can describe a hat, and I say, yeah, a hat is blah blah blah. That is an analytic proposition. You don't need hats to exist. I just gave you what
Not
the
necessarily. If I say that the hat is black, it depends on what hat you're talking about. There has to
well, we're
be
jumping
some.
ahead
Well, I
because
know, but
I
I'm
didn't.
saying to.
If you were to say the hat is black, that could be a synthetic.
But I'm just filling
But
in the
that
blank for your blah blah blah. That's not an analytic proposition.
no, I was giving you an analytic proposition. So if I was to say that a hat is a piece of fabric that you wear on your head, or whatever, so that
Hmm.
would be the analytic proposition. And if I point to the thing on your head and said that's a hat,
Hmm.
that would be the synthetic proposition. Okay, so now notice what you need in order to falsify things. In order for the synthetic proposition that is a hat, in order for that to be falsified, you need to not be wearing a hat. And that needs to not be a hat.
Okay.
Then that synthetic proposition is false. All right. Now, if for the analytic proposition that is a hat is blah blah blah,
A hat is a head covering.
yeah, right. So now the way you falsify that is there needs to be a contradiction. Isn't that, you see what I'm saying? It is not contingent upon reality. It's like saying a triangle a triangle is a shape with three sides,
Hmm.
right? Triangles do not need to exist in order for that proposition to be true. Because all I'm doing is defining a term. I'm not
Okay.
saying anything about reality. This is why I think I told you to look at the correspondence theory. That is not how analytic propositions operate. That is so in the correspondence theory of truth, truth is that which corresponds
Yeah.
to reality, right?
Yeah. We've covered
And
that.
analytic propositions make no appeals to reality. They're just defining terms.
Hmm. But your statement about morality does because you're referring to well-being, which is a statement about the world.
No,
It's a statement about individuals in the world because
I'm
as you explain it,
when I
you talk about how you can go in and observe acts that affect your health, your wealth, your security, freedom that down the line.
So when I say a moral act is an act that contributes to well-being,
Hmm.
I'm not applying it to anything in the world. I am just describing what a moral act is.
Okay.
Now we can look out into a world and see whether any specific act contributes to well-being. Right. So we said well-being is health. Right. A
Hmm.
moral act is that what contributes to your health. Right. That's be
Yeah.
part of the definition.
So
Right. And
let's take something that we might disagree with then.
mhm.
Maybe this can then help some of the differences bubble to the surface. Church attendance is a good thing.
Church attendance.
Yeah. Ch-
Okay.
Church, or not even attendance. Church participation is a moral act. It contributes to your spiritual health. It can contribute to your spiritual happiness. It
I, I
contributes to your
I would just
spiritual
say
freedom.
happy. So if that was true, I would just say happiness.
Right,
Like
but
I don't see any need to add spiritual in front of it.
well,
But
but
spiritual
because
happiness is just part of happiness.
sure,
So
but
like that's what I'm saying.
that's a component about. So would you disagree with the statement that church participation is a moral act?
So it depends on what the church is doing. So like I'm
Fair
definitely
enough.
I fully endorse a lot of the communal aspects of the church. There's also parts of it that I think are toxic.
Okay.
And
So
so
let's make it more specific because I know there's a bunch of different churches out there.
okay.
As a Reformed Baptist,
Mhm.
it is. I'm just gonna say. I think it's the most moral thing to go to a Reformed Baptist church because that's where you're gonna find the greatest percentage of truth compared to all the other churches out there,
Mhm. That
which would include teachings that you and probably many others would find false, reprehensible, like total depravity, for example.
Yeah, that would be a synthetic proposition.
Right. I agree it's a synthetic proposition, but what's wrong with me making that statement, me making that proclamation that participation in a Reformed Baptist church is a moral act?
It's wrong because it doesn't correspond to reality.
Sure does.
It does not.
How so? How does it not correspond to reality?
Because because it's not good for people's health to think that they are born condemned and that there's nothing they can do to help themselves, and just the type of the mental mindset that is created by reformed theology, I would argue, is not healthy.
I would disagree because I would say if you have cancer, wouldn't you be better off knowing you have cancer?
Definitely.
Okay. If you are sick in any regard,
Hmm.
wouldn't it be better for you to know that you're not that you're sick,
Yes.
and simply pretending it's not the case is a
Hmm.
detriment to your health? We would agree
Right.
with
So
that, right?
if it
Okay.
was
So
so
similarly, the doctrine of total the fact that we are sinners, that we are in sin, if we don't know about it, that's even worse than knowing about it.
I disagree with that fact. That's why I wouldn't
O-
say that it's
Okay.
immoral. So like if it was true that we were these sinners, and going to church and reformed theology would actually contribute to our well-being, then
It'd be the
then sure.
gospel, but yeah.
Yeah, then sure, I would accept that. I don't accept those facts.
Okay. And this
Those would need to be
that's an example
demonstrated.
of what we were talking about before. It's something that's consistent with my framework, but it's inconsistent with yours. So I can say church attendance, participation in my
Hmm.
local church, which is Reformed Baptist, spoiler alert, is a moral act. Therefore, right, to use your language, I will value that. So I will also encourage others to do so.
But
If not my church, then another one similarly minded,
what you just
specifically
said.
because of those truth claims that we agree that Reformed Baptists agree.
But what you just said isn't consistent it's not you're not right now. You're not being inconsistent with my framework. We're just disagreeing on the facts.
Okay, so
Like
that
so there could be so we can both agree on morality, but if we disagree on the facts, we will disagree on what act is and isn't moral. Like there could be a medicine that I think that is helping people, and you look at the studies and you're like, no, it's actually not helping people. It's making people sick.
COVID
Right?
vaccines.
Right. Okay, sure. So and you can look. So I can look at that and call it
Sorry if I
moral.
got you demonetized on YouTube.
I'm not monetized. I got 350 subscribers. Right.
Fantastic.
We are a long way from monetization. But anyway, so like
But something like that.
yes,
Right.
what we disagreeing on is the fact,
Hmm.
while still accepting the framework.
Okay, fair enough. So I mean, if you have a general enough framework like like you seem to have, then the, we could use that framework just fine. But when the rubber meets the road, like I said, there's going to be parts of our not existence experience that will be informed by those moral judgments, those moral values. The moral ontology will necessarily affect our moral behavior.
Oh,
There's
definitely, and the reason why is because we have values, and so
Mhm.
here's the thing. So my moral system is completely ontological, but I have values. Like my daughter, I try to teach her to be a good person. She's just like naturally kind and helpful to people, right? But I also
Mhm.
try to help her because she also demonstrates selfish behavior like all children does at times. Yesterday she stole a
Total
swing from
depravity be like that.
sure, yeah, sure. She stole a swing from some other kid. I had to teach her not to do that.
Eighth
Now,
commandment.
right, right. So now, so the way I appeal, so I my moral system is absent of oughts, but my worldview is not.
Hmm.
So I can teach oughts, and the moral system tells you what you ought and ought not to do based on how that act contribute to your values.
Okay. I, whew, we spent way too long making that transition.
Right. Okay.
No, that's fair, and I'll go ahead and apologize for being so obstinate because I know we spent probably the better part of an hour or so in a previous episode traversing that. Um, with that, I think I have a better understanding. So my previous comment, I would like to amend. It's not that your moral system only
Mm-hmm.
makes sense in your moral values. Your particular moral precepts would
So
only make
now,
sense in your own mind.
I'll
I think that would be a more accurate statement to say. So let me fix that.
I'll agree because that's how values work. Like there is no value that exists absent a mind.
Hmm.
A value is going to be necessarily subjective,
Sure.
and so again, so my system I wouldn't, so my worldview still wouldn't really suffer from any additional thing that any other worldview would, including Christianity.
Insofar as it does not correspond to reality, there would be some issues, right? Because that was the fundamental disagreement that we had just a moment ago. Is the
Mm-hmm.
statements I was making about the teachings of the church. You would find don't correspond to reality. Well, I would
Mm-hmm.
levy similar responses to your statements of reality. So, insofar that either of our values, beliefs, any propositions don't correspond to reality, there's at least an inconsistency there. Now, depending on what the error is, and I think we can find an agreement here. Depending on what that error is, we may feel that more more quickly and to a higher degree than others. Would that be fair to say?
Sure, I agree with that. Now I want to move into another point because now you had said I had briefly talked about justified immoralities.
Yes.
Yes, and
Well,
you
you talked
said,
about that. I
well,
didn't touch
wait,
that.
I brought it up, but you said it was a contradiction, or you said it was an
It's
oxymoron, which is a contradiction.
yeah. It comes across as an oxymoron. I think as I was thinking about it, best case scenario, I'll say it's a paradox, but I think practically, at least in the ways that we've discussed it,
Okay.
seems to come across as more of an oxymoron because to say something is moral, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, is to say something is immoral, but then also to say something is justified to do seems to be saying two different things. So to combine those two terms seems to, in
Mm-hmm.
practice, be a contradiction.
So they are saying two different things, but they're not saying contrary things. So now, so
To say
just
something is justified, I would say, is a moral thing to do. And and,
so.
and that might be just a difference between our two worldviews. But when I hear justified, like you're
Mm-hmm.
justified in doing something, that thing is not immoral.
So here's the problem that you run
Okay.
into, because if you don't consider certain acts justified, you're going to run into, I would call, moral absurdities. Like, for instance, I break into your house.
Hmm.
I'm mad at you, Wes. So I
Hmm.
break into your house and I shoot you. Okay? And another scenario, there's there's a lady who works late, and so she picks up her daughter from daycare, and she's walking home late at night.
Hmm.
And this man pulls up in a van, tries to abduct her daughter. In
Hmm.
order to save her daughter's life, she shoots him. She
Good for
shoots
her.
that guy.
Yep.
Right. I agree. Good for her. That's what she should do. Right. I carry
That's
a gun. My wife
justified
carries a
and
gun.
not immoral.
So no, but here's the problem, because morality, a moral act, is that which contributes to well-being.
Hmm.
Right. It's
Whose
not
well-being
any
are we talking
particular.
about?
Everybody's.
Okay. It's
Everybody.
better.
I
Okay.
I take into account any conscious creature,
Okay.
anybody that is capable of experiencing health, wealth, security, happiness, and freedom.
Okay.
So when you shoot that person to protect her daughter, and I shoot you just because I'm mad, those are equal equal morally.
No,
I
incorrect.
agree, they're
I
not. That is why that's why we bring in justifications, because
okay.
justified is based on your limitations. There, when she had to save her daughter,
Hmm.
right? There's the tools available to her are limited, right?
Hmm.
Let's if she's Superman, she could have just picked the daughter up and flew away or did something else. If she was God, she
Right.
could have snapped his fingers, right? Snapped her fingers and stopped him, right? And that would mean that killing him would be unjustified because she wouldn't need to do that. But right then, that was the only means available to her to protect the well-being of her daughter.
Okay.
So because her actions are limited, that is the best way she could have done to contribute to well-being.
I I don't disagree with the justified aspect of it.
Okay.
I disagree with calling that act immoral. I would say it's actually immoral for the man to attempt the kidnapping to begin with.
They're both immoral.
I I don't think it's immoral to defend one's family. So just using the limited context of what you shared,
Mm-hmm.
you have the well-being of the kidnapper or the attempted kidnapper.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other hand, you have the well-being of the potential kidnapping victim, the
Yep.
victim's mother, the victim's
Mm-hmm.
father, the victim's siblings,
Mm-hmm.
right? So on
Everybody else
balance,
on the earth, the
right.
entire earth.
But specifically those for the
Yeah.
sake of this, I would
Mm-hmm.
say on that score, well-being is increased by the shooting of the kidnapper. And I would go so far as to say the community and the ripple of the concentric circles going outwardly are also better when kidnapping is not tolerated.
I
Now,
I agree and
so,
that makes it justified,
but that
but it will
makes it
be a
also moral.
but now here's the thing. So you said you don't you think it's moral to defend your family.
Yeah.
I agree, but here's the problem. Like so, she wasn't just defending her family. Like you could call it
Hmm.
all of that. But here's the thing. But there was a bunch of acts
Sure.
that were in place here. So it
Yeah,
was
I
moral.
get that. It's just it's to call that an immoral act. I think regardless of touching it up with the justified language,
Mm-hmm.
I would say fundamentally, like that statement to say that it's immoral to shoot the person trying to kidnap your daughter is immoral. I would say that statement is fundamentally incorrect. It is inconsistent. It does not correspond to reality.
So okay. So
That's
it so
that's where my issue is.
so the analytic proposition, right? A
Okay.
moral act is that which contributes to health, right?
Hmm.
Now,
And
there's
that
one. That's
act
one problem.
contributed to health.
It also
When evil is punished, it contributes to well-being.
uh, okay, but it didn't just do that. It also violated. So another definition you could have an immoral act is an act that violates health, or you could say detribute, which isn't a word. Facade made it up, but I like the word detribute because it's and you even know exactly what I mean when I say it, right?
It's a moral detriment.
So
I
that's
think
what
that may have
that's
been the word. So that's
yeah
what
yeah that's what
pops into
that's
my
what
mind. Detribute. We'll go with
right.
that one though. I
So
like it.
yeah, detribute. So so it detributed to health because
Hmm.
she took a life. So
Sure.
that act, which is part of protecting your family, but it doesn't
Hmm.
just involve that,
Sure.
right? But that's
Depends on the
particular act.
circumstance.
So
Yeah,
yeah, it
and
was
I think this is something that, for example, um, biblical morality helps with, right? I think it's Exodus 21, 22. Actually, to use your previous example of breaking into my house, right? There's a juxtaposition. If somebody breaks into your house and it's nighttime and you strike them down, you kill them, right? You don't bear any moral weight for that because the scripture doesn't say this, but it's sort of implied and understood in the teaching is that you don't know why they were there. right? On the other hand, if the sun has risen on him, right, if it's during the daytime and you break into my house and I see that you're just trying to take my TV or something, or I can see that you're unarmed and I pull out a gun and shoot you, then I am guilty of murder in that instance. So there are considerations to make that don't necessarily make something a justified immorality. It places those acts firmly either in the moral or immoral category.
I mean, I'm fine with, I'm fine with you calling that moral, but
Hmm.
we are no longer using my definition. So I'm explaining to you
I'm
what,
fine with that.
right? It's right. It's like, so I'm in my framework. In order for me to call the act of her shooting that man to protect her daughter, to call that moral would be a contradiction. The whole system comes falling apart. That's why we call it
It,
justified.
the
It's because it's treated
but the
completely
system doesn't come
differently.
apart.
Well, it's a contradiction.
Well,
You found an
I would
act that
say
is
this is
both
the
immoral
absurdity.
and
This is an
moral.
example of the absurdity that comes from a non-theistic, or I would say even just any non-Christian moral framework. Is in practice, you run into these types of situations, and we can play some
I
word
don't,
games
but
about calling an immorality justified, but
I don't run into that
fundamentally,
problem because I have
you
because it's
don't think you
justified.
do. Yeah, but either it's justified or it's immoral. Like the term, just using that term
Those
itself.
okay.
I get what you're trying to do in this regard, but I'm saying that's part of the
What you
issue.
said is either justified or immoral. That's a false dichotomy. Like
It's
it's either justified or not justified. It's either
right, but
moral
that's a
or not
statement of
immoral.
objective
But
reality.
but what I'm saying, that's a false dichotomy. It'd be like saying something is either black or blue.
No,
It,
but because
it,
when we're
it
talking about the goodness of an action, there's not a third option, right? It's not a false dichotomy unless there's a realistic third option. When
the
you're
third
talking about
option is both. It could be both justified and immoral.
it's but no. If the options are moral or immoral, and you say it's both, then you recognize the oxymoronic
that
corner that you
that
box
would be
yourself into.
a contradiction, and that's why I have
Exactly.
just and that I am not doing that. That's why I have justified immoralities. Because if I take out justified and then I call that act that you
Hmm.
say is moral,
Hmm.
if I was to call it moral, it is a contradiction. So
Well,
I'm
I
not
would
running
encourage
into
you
any.
to abandon that flawed moral system. Repent, if you will.
Okay, what I'm saying is there is no contradiction here. Just like imagine, you know what an affirmative defense is.
Sounds like a legal term.
Yeah, it's a legal term. So like it's a type of defense. Like most defenses, they I forget the term you call it. But like if I say you broke my window,
Uh huh.
right? Um, I wanna charge you with vandalism or destruction of property because you broke my window, right?
Hmm.
Now, if you were to say no, you didn't break your window, I think that's called case in chief. I think that's what it's called. Now,
Sounds right.
if you said,
Like
"Hey,
that's the
I did,"
substance of the issue at hand.
yeah, because it's a type of defense. But
Yep.
there's another defense called an affirmative defense when you said, "Yeah, I did break his window, but it was a good reason." And the reason is because there was this car that was on fire. People was trapped inside of it. Like it was a Tesla. You know what's going on with the
Yeah.
Teslas? Like
Yeah. They're
they'll
blowing up.
catch on fire. You get locked inside. The doors get disabled.
Right.
Right? Somebody was going to burn alive. And when you broke my window to get to a fire extinguisher to put it out,
Yeah.
that is the affirmative defense. So you
Sure.
actually committed the
Mitigating
act.
circumstances.
Right. So you're committed the act,
Hmm.
but it's justified. That's an affirmative defense, and people get off the hook like that all the time.
Right. Because it's not an
You could
immoral thing to do. It's not an illegal thing to do.
no, it is illegal. It
Then
is
why do they
it
get off?
because it's justified.
Uh, you see my point. Like if it was illegal and they were being held to that standard, they would not then be found not guilty.
No. So no. It is illegal. They committed the act. But what the law is deciding to vacate the punishment because of the context of the issues. They're not saying you
Right.
did. They're not saying you did not break the window. You definitely did. That is a
Hmm.
form of vandalism. You
Right.
vandalized the property, which is
But
illegal.
that term
However,
affirmative defense, right, is there recognizing that in other contexts that would not be a good thing to do. That would be a detriment, or I'm sorry, detribute to well-being. Um, that in this context, it was not only not an immoral thing to do, it was the right thing to do.
no. Hold on. So let's stay within
But
this. Let's stay
that's the
within this.
reasoning behind it. Like
No, it's not
that's
the
why you
reasoning
have that
behind it.
sort of.
So remember, the law doesn't dictate moral or immoral. It's dictating legal
The
versus illegal. All right.
civil
So
law is just a practical morality.
this isn't civil law. You committed a crime. You're saying you vandalized something.
If you're talking about a crime, how are we not talking about civil law?
That's criminal law. Like civil law,
Well, okay, I'm
you're not gonna
sorry.
be found guilty for it.
Not civil criminal court. I'm talking about law in society, right?
Okay,
Civilization. Sorry. Yeah,
okay. I'm
but no,
talking
I'm with you on that.
specifically
That
about criminal law, right?
okay.
So it's determining
Right.
whether or not you committed the act. So they can still find you guilty, but because of what's happening,
Hmm.
because of the context, just like for instance, like when you're found you're insane,
Hmm.
right? That all right. So that's
Not guilty by reason of insanity or mental defect or whatever the current term du jour is, right?
I
But
don't know.
it's
Not guilty by reason of insanity. That I don't know if you're not guilty. I'm not. Maybe it depends on a jurisdiction, but
but
like in
my point with that is civil and criminal law. We'll just lump those in. Are public morality. Like it's what we as whoever the body politic is that's bound by
mhm.
those civil or criminal laws, um, that that is the morality that is accepted by that body politic. So when
Right.
there's a
But what
law
I'm
that says you can't steal, and there's levels of petty theft, larceny, grand larceny, on and on and on,
mhm.
all of that is fundamentally an outworking of morality. It's the reason the laws on the books, the reason these acts are considered illegal, are because
Right.
they are
But what I'm
inherent
saying.
agreed to be, not inherently agreed to be, immoral.
But
So I mean that's just a moral framework.
okay, but that's not what the law is determining. It's determining legality. Like it's not
The
delving into
legality
moral
is
philosophy.
if you've got a category, if you've got morality up here, legality can it wouldn't be cleanly under morality, but it might be under and then stretching over to beyond
The,
morality, because something
there's
can
some
be illegal and something can be legal but also immoral.
yes, something can be
Granted,
illegal and then not immoral.
right? But that's why I say it's a public morality, right?
Well,
That's
there's some overlap, and then there's some parts where it just doesn't connect at all.
right,
But I'm saying, okay, but with my analogy,
because there's the
what I'm
difference between sins and crimes, and that's
right, okay,
again something that Christianity helps with.
but okay, but with my analogy, what I'm just pointing out is that how somebody can still be found in violation of the law. However, the law can can suspend the
Hmm.
punishment because of the context, and they're just saying it's justified. They're
Hmm.
not saying you didn't break the law. There is no contradiction.
But from a legal framework, what is the punishment that is administered? Either
None.
financially, in exact. That's my point. Is there is no legal penalty there, so you are, for all intents and purposes, not guilty
So
because
no,
there's no punishment.
you can say
Do you still
like
have a
if
felony on your record when you do that, or
no
a
you wouldn't.
misdemeanor on your record?
No,
Exactly right. There is no legal recourse for that.
okay, no. Hold on. So like okay, so that being legal or illegal is not contingent upon there being a punishment for the crime. It's whether the act is illegal. You could outlaw murder and then have no punishment
But
for it.
how
It would
how
murder
how
would still
is
be illegal.
consistency or conflict with the law adjudicated
Like in the courtroom.
in the courtroom? So in the courtroom, if you were found, if at the end of it you have no penalties levied on you, then that court, that judge, that jury, that body has found you, for all intents and purposes, not guilty.
It did not. It's a separate act. That's why there's separate hearings for it. They determine whether or not you committed the act, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's illegal, and then there's another thing that determines what punishment you may get, and that's based on some other circumstances, like your previous history,
Hmm.
what the context of the crime, like what else did you do was just it's just very inhumane. Like it's just different things that they
Sure.
look at. So what I'm saying is so just like you can have a act that is illegal but justified, you can have an act that is um, justified and immoral. There is no contradiction because they're pointing to different things. A contradiction would be if I relied on both the truthfulness and falsity of some premise of
Hmm.
some principle, and
Well,
they're pointing to different things.
I'll just put this out there. Now, granted, not everything you read on the internet is true, but
Yeah.
a quick Google search, you know, related to guilt in an affirmative defense. A defendant is not found guilty if an affirmative defense is successfully proven. An affirmative defense operates to exonerate the defendant, resulting in
Yeah.
an acquittal or dismissal of the case. That's what I've been saying. Like, you're not guilty of breaking the law.
Okay. So maybe that was a bad analogy that I
Fair,
gave.
fair enough.
Okay, but what I'm saying is when I say the act is immoral, I'm describing one thing, the act. And when I say the
Hmm.
act is justified, I'm describing something else, the actor.
I
The act
think.
is dependent on its contribution to well-being. The justification is
Mhm.
dependent on your capabilities.
I think that analogy was fantastic for exactly the reasons we just discovered. Because if you are justified in doing something, then that thing is no longer, or should no longer be considered immoral, right? It is not a reflection of immorality if you are justified in doing that thing.
So if you care about not having contradictions,
It's no
and so
contradiction for me. It's only a
so
contradiction in your moral system. You've acknowledged that. It's a contradiction in your moral
so
system.
yeah, that's why my system doesn't do that. My system doesn't have any contradictions.
So we've found at least an impracticality of
No,
your
we did
system.
it. It where it the if I was to disregard justified immoralities, there would be a contradiction. I don't do that.
Right. And
I mean,
my whole point is the term and the use of the term justified immorality is itself oxymoronic.
what is the ox? Give me. Be very specific. Give
Sure.
me the proposition that it that is assumed to be both true and false.
If an act is justified, it's moral. Period. So if you're saying
So
something is justified and something is immoral, it's violating the law of non-contradiction. It
moral
can't be
acts.
moral and not moral at the same time in the same way.
Okay, so moral acts need not be justified. Like if you're hurt and if you're hungry and I give you food, that doesn't need to be justified. It's just good. Like
Not
nobody.
necessarily.
If you're hungry and I give you food, you saying that would.
No, I mean it's not necessarily good. Is my point, but that
So
doesn't have anything to do with a
okay,
justified
okay.
immorality.
So it's in the definition
Uh
that
huh.
morality is an act that contributes to your health. You need food
Right.
to maintain your health, right? Okay. So if
That.
I
But
give you if I
that.
give you food, right? That act is good. Well,
Again, not necessarily.
okay, all right.
But because
Do you give it any charities?
yes,
Okay, can you justify that?
yes,
What's the
it's
justification?
it's good to save babies from abortion. It's good to help moms who are pregnant in high risk situations. It's good to
No, no,
help
no,
help
I'm not
support.
asking.
But I mean, these are the type of charities that I give to.
But
It's
you're
good
just
to
okay. But
care for orphans.
in
It's
that
good
instance,
to
and
educate the populace.
in that instance, you would just be saying that it's just moral. But there's no need to justify anything. Just like if I go
But
to it,
but
like
hold
when
on
I
a
get in
second.
my car,
The act
if
of
I was to
giving
break
money
my
to
own
something,
window,
right?
go
Hold
ahead.
on. The act of giving money isn't necessarily moral or immoral, but giving money in accordance with a moral truth is a justification for why I'm giving this money. It's different, for example, than me going on Facebook Marketplace and saying, "Ooh, I like that couch. I'm going to give you money in exchange for the couch." That's a different exchange of funds. It's a different justification, even. But when I say I'm giving to this organization
Hmm.
because they do these moral things, right? I'm that my justification for giving them this money is not to get a couch. It's not to get, a burger through the drive-through. It's not even to benefit me, but it's
All
giving
right.
in
So
accordance with conscience in service of
this might
moral
help.
good.
This might help. So when I say give a justification for, it is a way of giving an excuse for
Right.
why
A
my act,
reason.
why the act, no, but why the act should be excused. Okay? So, if you do something that is morally good, there's no reason for it to be excused. It's just good, right? If you do something bad, like if you harm somebody,
Hmm.
that would need to be excused. You would need to give an excuse for it. And this particular instance, the excuse is I was trying to protect my daughter. He was trying to kidnap me.
Hmm.
That you would need to give an excuse for it. But if you help somebody, there's no it makes no sense to ask for an excuse for it. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Well, so to your point though, if you're if you're giving of something to somebody, it's not in service to them actually bettering themselves, right? If you're focused on, for example, their physical health in the moment at the expense of their physical health down the line because they become dependent on that. And I mean, it's not necessarily an individual thing, but you're doing that individual more harm than good. And so it comes back to the moral weight we
well,
talked about with
then in that case, then it might be immoral. Well, just find some
that.
act that we
That's
agree that
that's why I'm saying just giving the food isn't necessarily a moral good.
okay. Let's say in the scenario, there's an act where giving the food is necessarily good.
Okay.
All right, so there's no reason to give an excuse for it. Like, and nobody would ask for that.
Sure, they would.
No.
People who are ignorant of the context, right? So say for example,
Okay.
I'm going to go pick up pizza for the family. As I'm walking out, there's somebody who, let's just say, regardless of the circumstance, it would be
Mm-hmm.
good for me to give them food. I reach into my pizza and here's the pepperoni. It's all you,
Mm-hmm.
Hoss, right? And I get home, and my wife goes, "Where's the pepperoni? That's my favorite pizza." She's gonna demand a justification,
I got a question. All right,
right?
so
So in that moment, the moral calculus has shifted. It's not just me and this individual, it's me and my wife, and me as the provider, a moral responsibility I have to provide. Granted, not every wife needs pepperoni, but sometimes my wife does. So I've got to give her an explanation for that. I've got to give her a justification for why I
but
gave her
so
food
okay,
away.
but I'm not asking for. It's not just an explanation, right? Some when I'm saying excuse, like
Hmm.
as in the sense of right of like something that is bad, something that is immoral. Okay, so let me
But if
try
you're
another
talking,
way.
oh, okay,
Let me try.
but
Let
you're
me try
you're
this
trying.
another way.
It seems like you're baking in the idea of excuse to necessarily be contradictory to something that's moral.
No, what I'm trying to
Because if it needs an excuse, it's immoral, and if it's moral, it doesn't need an excuse. It
because
doesn't
it's just
need to be.
moral, right? Okay, so now so a contradiction would be accepting both a premise and its logical negation. Okay,
Okay.
right? So accepting both A and non A, right? Okay, so
Okay.
now one the proposition is that a morality is that which contributes to well-being.
Right.
Okay,
That's your framework.
justify okay justifications. No, not just the framework. Right now, just the proposition. All
Okay.
right. Now, A moral act the justification of an immoral act is contingent upon the actor's capabilities. Are those
Okay.
logical negations of each other?
Repeat them again, back to back.
Morality is that which contributes to well-being.
Hmm.
That's one. Two, the justification of a moral act is dependent upon the actor's capabilities.
The justification
Of an immoral act is
of an
dependent
immoral
upon,
act.
yes.
Um, on the face of it, I wouldn't think so.
Then there's no contradiction because I am saying two different things. I'm saying one, this act is immoral.
Hmm.
Two, it is justified because of the actor's capabilities.
But if it's justified, then it's moral.
So you're using
I
some.
think you're
Okay,
overcomplicating it.
no,
I really do.
wait, you're calling it.
It's I think it.
If
I
it,
think moral ontology is a lot simpler than you're making it out to be. I think in those circumstances, something can either be good, moral or immoral.
that's a fact.
Yeah, whether or not we know, whether or not we're able to agree. But I would say those are generally the only two options, and there's some things that are amoral. There's not anything that is a justified immorality. That's not a real
So
category
justified
of things.
immorality. So no,
A justified immorality is just moral.
No. Justified immorality is a subset of immorality. So you can have black and non-black, and in non-black you can have white, blue,
Hmm.
grayish, like
Sure,
whatever. All of those
I,
are subsets of non-white,
I get what you're
of
saying, but
non-black.
yeah, I don't think I have a misunderstanding, at least now, of your use of the term justified immorality.
Right.
I just fundamentally
I don't see the
disagree
contradiction
with its
because
utility.
what's this, but here's, and this is why at the beginning I said it's a straw man, because you are, what you're doing is you're redefining morality, and you're redefining
No, I'm just using
justified
a
to
different
mean
moral
something that
framework.
I'm, but no, you're using it in a way that I'm not using it, and you're using it in your own way,
Hmm.
and then saying because it violates your definition, therefore for when I use it in my way, I'm contradicting myself. That's not the way that works.
I mean, we've been doing the same kind of thing with each other for, I don't know, a dozen episodes or so now. I mean, there's conclusions that are perfectly consistent with a Christian framework, that, but like moral oughts, that you reject the conclusion of because you disagree with Christianity. So of
So
course you're going to disagree with oughts from your
so
creator.
no, so you can have moral oughts. What you can't do is get them from is statements alone. That's what I was saying you can't do. If you
Well,
just
I've
bake a ought,
never
if you
I've
bake a
never
ought into the
tried to
premise.
say that you could get an ought from nothing but is statements.
Well, that's what we were discussing at the beginning.
Well,
Because
that's the
because
framework you wanted
I
to put it in, but
because
that's
I
not
was
in.
telling you that I would just give you ises.
Sure.
Right,
I mean, I
because
walked through it because it was a fun mental exercise, but
but here
that's not how I would pretend to put morality forth
but
as any sort of uh, binding on anybody else.
here's the thing, because like there is nothing intrinsic about any particular value. There's not, and it's definitely not objective. So if you say that you ought to do something, if you just bake the value into it, then
Hmm.
you're not, your system isn't based on reality. You have reality plus your preferences, and then from that you get your oughts, which is fine.
Okay.
That Phantom does that. Phantom X. If you're still watching, he thinks, well, he thinks that it's all the way down. Um, and so I don't even sure I was going with that. Hey, Phantom, you just come on the show. We can discuss this. But but okay, but what I was saying is, so like if in my system avoids preferences, all I use is just reality, and then from there I can make assessments about reality. That's why that's why I remove oughts from it. I don't like them because of that problem.
You don't like
What
them. I mean, that really is a good summary of the disagreement here.
No. Well, so I'm
I,
sorry. What I should have said, I don't like contradictions because
I'm with you.
I like coherent worldviews. If it's incoherent, then we have a big problem. That's what I should have said. And so
I would agree with you on
I
that.
have a completely coherent system, and all you have to do
I
is
disagree with
separate them.
that.
Yeah. Well, you haven't pointed out a contradiction. I haven't heard one.
I mean, it's fine. There was something else that you wanted to. I was actually curious of what your understanding was. Morality in animals.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. You said a morality doesn't apply to animals. Um. Well, so
Yeah, generally speaking, I think that's the case.
yeah, my moral system does apply to animals, but
Well,
yours
moral
doesn't.
ontology doesn't.
Well, it does. Like it's not good for the zebra to get hit by the lion. It's not good for his health to be eaten by a lion. So immoral. But now you had said that it doesn't apply to it. The issue that I have is that your system is based on the Bible.
Hmm.
Supposedly,
I,
the
I,
Bible
to,
doesn't agree with that.
to be more accurate, it's based on the character and nature of God,
Okay.
certainly as revealed in the Bible. But
The Bible is accurate though, right? So
sure,
because the Bible applies morality to animals. I can give you instances of that.
go ahead.
So after the
I'm
fall of
happy to be
man,
corrected by
all
scripture.
right. So after the fall of man,
Uh
there's
huh.
three people are punished, not two, three. There's three individuals: Adam, Eve, who else?
The serpent.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
Right, right,
I,
right. This is in chapter 3.
I don't think that's an accurate representation of animal kind, as it were, because that's the only instance until we get
Are
to
you saying he was punishing that
it's okay.
individual snake? Because that
No,
is not the case.
but because the punishment was to wander around on his belly, so probably was not a snake to begin with. Um, but I think there are special characteristics of that particular serpent that at least for the purposes of our discussion, I wouldn't necessarily see that as a broad brush morality applies to animals. I do see instances where
The
animals are
snake is an
punished.
animal, though, right?
Well, yeah, but we're not talking about snakes. We're talking about a serpent, a very
Okay, so
particular talking serpent,
okay, but
which
a serpent and a snake is the same thing.
that how many snakes do you know are talking to you?
So
And
I
are
don't.
you watching Harry Potter when that happens?
Right? So
No, but
I
I'm
don't.
saying
So I don't know if any. I don't know if any non-human animal that speaks. Right? Snake,
mhm.
serpent, or but if you just but a serpent and a snake is the same thing.
Okay, well,
The-
I'll grant you. Morality applies to all talking animals. There,
Okay, but God didn't just punish all talking animals. He punished.
every single one.
Okay, but that's I don't see it. You didn't get that from the Bible because God punished all the
No,
serpents,
but
all the
just
snakes. Matter of, depending on which version of the Bible you read, it might say serpent, it might just say snake, because there's no difference.
so you mean to tell me your view of the Bible is that all snakes are descendant from that one serpent?
No, just
Okay.
no, just like I don't believe all people are descendant of Adam and Eve, like the Bible implicates
Well, sure.
otherwise.
I know
But
naturalistic evolution would say,
but
mankind evolved from zero people. I think two people makes more sense logically speaking. But that aside, I think when it comes to animals, I you know a special case for a talking serpent in the Garden of Eden. Okay, that's
God
not
just
exact.
punished that snake, just like in the same way that God punished all of humanity because
No,
of Adam and Eve. He
there's a
punished
sense
all
in which
snakes because
all
of.
of creation was punished, but that's a
But
result of the fall,
sure, okay, but
and the
there are
moral
certain things that
culpability
got.
of that rests solely on the shoulders of man.
Okay, but no, but the serpent got a special punishment. Like God didn't mention anything about punishing whales
Uh,
or
sure.
zebras here. So like the serpent got a
Okay.
specific punishment because of something that
Yes.
he did. Just like Adam got
Right.
punished because of something he did, Eve got punished because of something he did. The
Right.
serpent
And
got
what you
punished
don't
because of something he
see
did.
in the rest of the Bible is you don't see animals being held morally accountable for their actions as though they're morally
Right here
culpable.
in Genesis 3.
What, you didn't hear what I
It's
said at all, did you? What you
okay.
don't see throughout the rest of the Bible
Mm-hmm.
is a consistent theme. So pointing to one unique instance in all of recorded history is a very poor justification for a doctrine.
It does it in it does it in Exodus, and also does it
So
in Genesis as well.
I'll grant you
So there's
there
other
are
places that it does
instances
it.
where when an animal uh, kills a person,
Right.
that animal is not put to death for murder.
It's, no, it's punishing. It's being punished for shedding man's blood. And like even when it says, but like
However, but
man or beast who shed man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. It puts beast
correct,
in the same sentence.
right? But no one has ever looked at that and go, that ox that gored my neighbor is guilty of murder. Rather,
Not murder, but he
what's
shed man's blood. He's being
right, but
punished.
we're not talking about moral culpability. We're talking about protection from danger,
Okay,
right?
that's not what's happening here.
That's exactly what's happening
No, it's
there.
not
Because
because no, it's not because if anything, all you could do, you could just quarantine the animal, but that's not what God commands. He's God is demanding blood. He says you shed man's blood.
mhm,
He demands blood. This is
but that's
punishment.
not because the animal has committed something immoral.
It's because he
That's
shed the
because
man's blood,
right. It's a protection of
which is
mankind because
immoral.
of the value of humanity.
Okay, so but the animal is doing something immoral. He's shedding somebody's blood, and so God demands him to be punished.
But it's not a punishment for murder. That's my point though.
I'm
It's
not. That's not what you. That's not what you said. You
right.
said that
But
animals aren't subject to morality.
correct.
Like okay, so I don't care about murder
They're not.
specifically. I'm just
But
talking about
that's
morality.
but
God is holding animals morally responsible.
when we talk about the unjust shedding of blood, we're talking about when humans are involved. We're talking about murder. It is immoral in that regard because
So
humanity is
it's
special.
about
It's the crowning gr-
that
crowning
verse is
element
not
of the.
talking. That verse doesn't say murder. It says shedding of blood.
Okay,
But
but
so
that's my point.
Wes, murder is a specific type of homicide
Yes,
where a human kills another human. So
I'm aware of what
obviously, if
that
a
means.
beast do it, it's not going
Uh-huh.
to be murder. The problem is that
Precisely
I'm
my
pointing
point.
to is that it's still is okay. Well, we're not talking about whether animals could commit murder. We're talking about whether God hold animals morally responsible, and that's
There's no
exactly what He
indication that they're
does.
being held morally responsible.
Is Adam and Eve being held morally responsible for disobeying God?
They are, yes,
Okay,
because
so
they are
in the
moral
next
agents.
verse, in the next
There's
verse, when it
nothing that
says,
indicates animals by and large are moral agents. I I'll even grant you the serpent, but I maintain that it's a very poor example to build a
it's not a
doctrine
poor
of
example. Like,
animal morality.
your argument
You're
is
not
that
letting me
it.
finish the
Okay,
statement.
okay, I'm sorry.
Animals, right now,
Hmm.
there is no that serpent that is talked about in Genesis 3. That serpent is not anywhere around. The descendants of that serpent is not crawling through your backyard right now. Well, I don't know if you have rattlesnakes or copperheads up that far north, but the point remains, right? It's that is a special case. That is a unique instance in all of the animals in all of recorded scripture, right?
It's
So
not
trying
unique
to
because, like I said, there's a law that requires it.
I think you're straining at gnats here, my friend. I really do.
But because you said, well, it's not training in that. So this is a clear
You're
indication.
importing a moral element of the punishment, and I'm telling you that what the scripture is saying there is in protection of human life because of the value of human life, and it doesn't matter what the animal is, right? I mean, one way we can look at it, that same circumstance in
Mhm.
today's society, for example, no oxen are running around the neighborhoods right
Okay,
now.
but the serpent didn't kill anybody.
Mm, forget about the serpent, right?
We're
I
just
told you I'll
talking
grant you
about
that.
morality here, because
Okay.
your argument is that it
Well,
didn't say it enough times. Like
that's
there's a
not
lot
my
of things.
argument.
You said it's one scripture, and I shouldn't build a whole doctrine based off of that.
It's not just that it's one
There's a
scripture.
lot of things that are
Like,
mentioned once or a few times that doctrines are built off of. So
okay, and
it's absurd to say you need several scriptures. It was something is so plainly said.
okay, that's why I granted all talking animals can be considered moral agents. How about that? Right?
Well,
Every single talking animal can be considered a moral agent
is that in the
and can be
Bible?
held accountable. But you see the talking serpent, right?
Right,
There's your
but
one.
it didn't say
And
talking, but it didn't say
and
talking
Balaam's
serpents.
donkey
It
acted
didn't s-
morally.
it
It
didn't say talking
recognized.
serpents. It said serpents.
No, right. But I mean, the serpent was talking. How many other serpents do you see talking in Scripture?
None. But why would you assume that it's
Exactly.
just a serpent who talks? Like you might as well say
Because it's a serpent that
it's
is
my.
recorded as speaking, my friend. Like
But
I'm not
but
assuming it's a
I
serpent
know
that
that it's recorded
talks.
as speech. But what I'm saying is, why would you include that as a criteria for something being moral? I,
Oh my
well,
gosh.
she told me we're about to end the show.
Okay.
My daughter came in. But anyway, man, I enjoyed the discussion. My daughter came in. She's telling me it's time for me to put her in bed.
Totally
But
get it. I but let you do your closing, but I just want to say
yeah,
thank you for doing this. I am regularly reminded as as I engage with different folks on social media how insanely difficult it is to have genuine conversation, and it's not easy all the time with you, but I applaud once again your willingness to have the conversation, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to come on as clunky as I am, but I appreciate what you do, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
yeah, man, appreciate it, man. I always have fun. You want one of my favorite guys. I love arguing with reformed guys as a
Yes.
former reformed guy myself. But anyway, guys, we are ending the stream. I'm getting off. My wife's getting to me now.
Yeah.
But anyway,